All right, I think we can get going. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone that has joined us today. This session is being recorded, so if you're unable to be part of the recording, you may drop off. My name is Ismail Nalwala, and I'm the CEO of IoTap, based out of the DC metro area. I'm planning to go for about 30 to 45 minutes today. And today we're going to talk about renewals and recurring revenue management using Work 365 and Dynamics 365 as basically the sales application. Moving on here. All right, so I see from the folks that have joined us today that some of you in the audience are probably brand new to Work 365 and some of you that are existing users. So for those of you that are new to the application or new to Work 365, just a quick introduction. Work 365 is a subscription management and billing automation application that helps you scale and streamline your processes around recurring revenue, basically subscription-based revenue. Work 365 has automatic billing and payments, provisioning, automatic provisioning, and self-service capabilities. It is built on Dynamics 365 as a native application. So you're able to use all of the Dynamics CRM capabilities, including the sales management side of things. And as you can see, because it's built on Dynamics, you're also able to leverage the power of the Power Platform, right? Including Power Apps, Power Portals, Power Automate, Power BI, etc. Work 365 is used worldwide. It supports multi-currency, multi-language environments. We're able to generate invoices in 7 languages at this time. So with that introduction, I'll move on. So quick look at our agenda for today. Everyone here obviously understands the importance of renewals, and especially if you're doing recurring revenue. What I want to do is really set that in the context of the different types of profiles that you may have as resellers or partners, and tie that back into the CSP program a little bit, something that you may be more familiar with, right? So I know you know how important renewals are, and you probably have a process that does this. But we'll talk about the process and what complicates the process a little bit, and how Work 365 helps with renewals and renewal management. I'll also share some best practices, and along the way, I will do some polls. So if you don't mind just participating in that, it really helps us improve what we're doing. Thank you. All right, with that. So this is these 9 principles around recurring billing and subscription management that we try to talk about as part of this webinar series. We've covered various topics. This is something I've acquired from a company called Zoar, and some of you may be familiar with them. They're a leader in billing automation and recurring revenue. I'm not going to dwell on this too much today, but these are really important things that companies should do if you're looking at recurring revenue and subscription-based businesses. We've talked about quite a few of these, and today's topic touches on some of these different aspects. So it's hard to say specifically which one, but customer metrics certainly is one of these aspects that help with renewals. So with that, I'm going to do my first poll here. See if I can launch this poll. All right, I am launching a poll, so if you could just take a quick 30 seconds or so to respond to that, that would be highly appreciated. So we have almost everybody voted. If you could just put your vote in there, that would be great. All right, I am now going to close the poll, and I will share the results here as well, so you see what we have. So it looks like a lot of the audience here today has less than 20% of their billing relationships that are annual, which is very interesting. I'm going to hide this again and go back to my presentation. Hopefully everybody can see my screen. And I'm moving into the next slide here. And this is the data that I have. So a quick look at the data that we have in our system is that, about almost 80% of the billing relationships that we're aware of in Work 365 are actually monthly. So that's quite in line with what I'm seeing from the response as well. Now, this is important because even though a customer may sign a multi-year contract, from a practical standpoint, they're not very enforceable. The only enforcement tool really is the payment, right? If they made an annual payment, they're committed for a year. However, an unhappy customer that wants to leave will leave, and a contract is not going to improve the relationship. So, I have this term here called layer. Layer is, a common model used by companies to build their business, especially technology services companies, right? There's a customer acquisition cost to land a new customer. And then from there, with the right engagement, you continue to grow the adoption, expand the usage of the services, and then renew. Now, given the current climate, landing a new customer may be a little bit more challenging. So that's what kind of brings us to the importance of this session, which is around, retention and working with existing customers. As far as like the CSP landscape is concerned, signing the relationship, reseller relationship, getting a tenant set up, and transitioning some of those services may be part of that land stage. And then, the adoption comes from the customer understanding the benefits of the services and having all the end users experience those services. And then eventually you expand that in the form of some additional services like security and calling plans and things like that. And then obviously you repeat while you retain these customers and ensure that you are optimizing the services and the business relationship correctly. All right, so what I want to do is also share some stats and data that I've compiled based on the adjustment that's happened because of the pandemic that's been affecting everybody worldwide, right? In the US, we started to see and feel the effects of this really in March. So what's happening is it's affecting Q2 results. This is obviously not just Microsoft partners, but technology companies that are selling B2B solutions across the board. These numbers are for that. So about 68% of B2B companies, technology companies, are reporting flat earnings, and 35% are reporting a 10% decline for this quarter, right? That's actually significant. 74%, which is, 3/4 of these companies are considering serious changes to their offer portfolio. Almost 2/3 of these companies are reporting reductions to their operating budgets. Now, companies appear to be targeting non-essential discretionary spending to preserve jobs. And we know why that is, because jobs are an important component of that federal stimulus program. Now, what is also important is that these companies are reducing what they see as non-essential services. IT, however, is considered an essential service, and I can share some data here on what we have seen from the Work 365 user base. So back in February, basically, we saw about 4.3 services or subscriptions per billing relationship. In May, that number's jumped up to about 5.1. What that means is that most users of Work 365 are adding additional services, maybe an additional SKU to help potentially with the needs of the companies at that time, right? So we saw a big shift in companies moving to using Teams, and a lot of this could be the business voice services that were added. All right. So now going back to the renewal discussion a little bit, the first thing we want to understand is and talk about is really product offerings, right? So we'll define what we're discussing when we talk about renewals. We're talking about the sale of some product or service offering. In general, there are going to be two types of offerings, right? A vendor offering and a partner offering. So everybody on this call potentially is a partner, and the one main vendor for a lot of the people on the call is going to be Microsoft. This, in a way, this is important because the way you sell this and your dependency on this kind of almost defines your identity and the processes as well that you follow. In some cases, you may be the vendor and have no relationship to another vendor. However, for those that are in the CSP program or reselling, Microsoft products, you definitely have a vendor offering, right? All right, so let's see what happens here. So if you have some dependency, you're bundling some items. That's what typically MSPs do, right? You have bundled offerings from multiple vendors that you position for your customers. You layer, your labor and services along with that, and you potentially have one or multi-year contracts with these customers. You may collect the money monthly, most likely, or you may collect the money annually. But this is typically what it looks like for MSPs. There's some overlap and some dependency between the vendor offering and your offering. All right. Now, in some cases, your offering looks exactly like the vendor offering, and that's what VARs do. They're basically reselling products. Their model is around margin-based sales and generating higher volumes, right? So that's what a VAR is typically doing. And in this case, everything that they sell is entirely dependent on the vendor offering. And so the vendor's pricing, vendor's terms, vendor's offers are extremely important in this case. All right, and then you have partners that really don't combine offerings, but build on the platform from the vendor. So these are typically ISVs, right? This type of renewal will have its own independent renewal cycle. For ISVs, renewals are extremely important because their services sometimes may not even be deemed as essential. However, retention and renewals have a significant impact to the bottom line. I've seen numbers like 5% improvements in renewal rates can contribute up to 95% to the bottom line, which means you almost double your bottom line if you retain more than 5% of your customers. Okay. Now, we looked a little bit at the product offerings and how those that can define what happens at the core. The next thing is to look at roles and who owns the renewal process. As you can see, there are different roles and ways in which to renew, right? First one on my list is the most skilled person potentially in the organization from a business acumen standpoint. This is typically the sales account executive. This person has potentially overall responsibility from a commercial standpoint for a specific account, right? And as I mentioned, probably the most business savvy person within the sales organization. Then you have the renewal specialist. This is also a sales role dedicated entirely to renewing recurring revenue. Generally, you would have one renewal specialist that can handle anywhere between 250 customers a year, maybe even up to 1,000, depending on the complexity of the renewal process. And then you have the customer success managers. This role, is primarily responsible for the health and adoption of the application. They can also be chartered, I guess, to own the renewal and commercials. And you'll see that the partner is also listed here. As far as Microsoft is concerned, excuse me, you as the partner are responsible for the renewal. That function has been outsourced to the partner. And in the CSP program, Microsoft has done a lot to reduce the complexity of the renewal process, and I will explain this a little bit more. And then you have the digital and e-commerce side of things. Basically, this is automated in a highly mature and simplified environment where a customer can do this through a self-service process, and requires significant investment in technology and and a process that's automated, right? So gonna launch another quick poll here. All right, we have about half the voting done. Just give it another 20 seconds, 30 seconds. Okay, almost there. All right, I'm gonna close this out. Close the poll, share the poll. So this is what you responded as. About a quarter of the people on the call today are, handling the renewal through the sales account executive. It's understandable. But then a third of you actually don't have a formal owner. Let's see if we can talk a little bit about that and help define some of this stuff. All right, I should be back to my presentation. Moving along. Come on. All right. So now that we've looked at the offering and how that impacts things, who owns the renewal process, let's look at factors that complicate this renewal, right? And maybe why some of you are using sales account executive and some of you that are using customer success reps, and some don't even have a formal owner yet. So, negotiations, telemetry, a whole bunch of these factors actually affect the renewal process. And I'll just kind of see if I can help explain some of these, right? So negotiations really simple. It's how complex the renewal negotiations need to be, right? Telemetry is around, do you have adoption data? Do you have good information on hand, including things like usage metrics, right? The process quality really is about your internal documentation and SOPs around renewals. On the relationship side, you might think about this as who owns the primary customer contact and responsibility. Generally, it could be the account executive. And then on the customer end, who owns the approval authority? On the skills side, of course, we talked about that. It's how much business acumen is actually required to navigate the renewal process with the customer. Then finally, you talk about priority. How important are renewal revenues to your company itself? In some cases, renewals may not be that important because of the kind of service you're offering. You're looking for new customer acquisitions. But I would say that in the current environment, renewals are probably extremely important for everybody as we look to retain existing customers. Then the variability in the renewal, there could be a significant shift in the budget and decision-making process, and a solution fit. So for example, someone's got on-premise infrastructure, they're looking to move to the cloud. That changes the whole renewal discussion because what you were originally selling is no longer what they actually want to buy. That changes everything altogether. And then, of course, the role of the partners. In the case of Microsoft, obviously they're leveraging the partners entirely through the CSP program. So hopefully that explains some of this. So this is the higher the complexity and the lower the maturity, the more energy and effort you're going to spend to the renewal. And so this takes us into the discussion of how do you simplify this and what are the best ways to set things up so you're lowering the cost and lowering the complexity and making the renewals a lot easier down the road. I'll talk about some of that. And one final poll. Thank you very much for your patience with these. I promise this is the last one. Okay, almost done. We have more than 60% of the votes in. I'll just give it another quick 10 seconds. All right, here we go. I'm going to launch the poll so you can, sorry, I'm going to share the poll here so you can see the results. You know, it looks like more than half of the group here has medium to high complexities in the renewal process. That's pretty interesting. Okay, we'll see how we can simplify that on the CSP side. All right, I'm going to hide that now and go back to my presentation. Hopefully you're seeing my screen. We'll move on to the next slide. Now, talking about all that in terms of what the factors are and how what drives complexity, I wanted to share an example with the group here so that we can relate this back. Enterprise agreements. If you remember, these were they're still there. Still a lot of them. Still a lot of large customers going through the enterprise agreement process. That is a classic example of a complex renewal with, I think, low maturity in a way. Maybe not low maturity, but definitely highly complex. It requires all these things to be there. And if you can kind of relate this now to what's currently happening, where Microsoft is shifting a lot of that enterprise agreement program sales into the higher end customers, the larger customers, and making more and more customers available through eligible for the CSP program, is because one of these things is it's hard to renew, it's hard to sell, it's complex, right? And these are the things that really drive some of the complexities. It's pricing changes, service changes, it's payment terms. So these things make it complex, and which is why enterprise agreements are an example of a complex renewal, right? Now, in contrast to that, CSP is very different. And that is why Microsoft has also been pushing the CSP program in a big way to partners and streamlining as much as they can from the standpoint of reducing the complexity and increasing the maturity and handing it off to partners. Because if you're going to give it to somebody else to manage a renewal, it's got to be simple. It's got to be easy to do. And so what have they done? Simple. It's monthly payments, right? As much as possible, and you cancel anytime. Now, because of the kinds of services these are, and the way they've been evolving over the last many years, it's fairly mature. It's possible to do this. So these are two examples of what I wanted to contrast with in terms of complex renewal processes and what I consider more mature and easier renewal processes. So with that background, I want to see if we can move this into a practical aspect of how Work 365 and Dynamics 365 can help with renewals. Right, so you've basically got these four things that you have to do as part of a renewal. You've got to know what's in your renewal queue, right? When do you start that renewal discussion? Is it 30 days, 60 days, 90 days before the renewal, before the end of the contract? Do you have enough consumption and adoption data? Do you have telemetry, right? And then are you leveraging a quoting process that has accurate pricing? And is your sales team, if they're the ones involved in this, able to understand how to upsell, how to cross-sell, and is that information easily available to you? And then finally, of course, you want to tie that into the cash and invoicing process and kind of close out the whole thing. Once you get paid, your renewal is effectively complete, right? So let's look at the application in terms of how it assists with this. So this is a screenshot of a billing contract in Work 365. Work 365, as I mentioned earlier, is built on Dynamics, and this is basically a Dynamics application, and Work 365 has a bunch of different areas of the application, but the core of it from a billing relationship standpoint is basically this billing contract. This is a result of a sale, and it encapsulates all the key elements of your sales engagement or that billing relationship. It's going to have your billing frequency, who pays the bill, dates, when does the contract end, things around renewals as well. So is this an auto renewal? What is the term of the renewal? So with this information, you're now tracking that renewal process, and you have the data within the system to be able to know and allocate the right person to take this on from a queue standpoint, right? Now, within the billing contract, you may have one or more subscriptions. In this case, as you can see, I've got a whole bunch of subscriptions that are associated with this one billing contract, right? And now we dig into the subscription a little bit, and you'll notice that the subscription also has specific information around, renewal data, which is what is the commitment end date, and is this an auto renew? Now, generally in CSP, these things are always going to be set to yes for auto renew, and the commitment end date really is a price commitment, nothing else. But that data is also there within the system, right? Now, what you do then is we talked about the queue. So with that data within Dynamics, the billing administrator dashboard is one easy way to get a list of all the billing contracts that you have due for renewal. Now you can essentially set up your own view, the default view in the system for the billing administrator, billing admin dashboard, shows you whatever is due within 90 days. You could certainly change this to 60 days or 30 days, and then have a process around who picks these items up as long as the queue is readily available to you. And each billing contract may have an owner or a team assigned. And if I go back, I'll show you what I mean by that. In this case, you see there's an owner field. You can use that owner field to decide who owns that billing relationship. You could also add another field there potentially to figure out if there's a renewal person that needs to get alerted based on renewals billing contracts. So we looked at the queue side of things. Now, the next thing we talked about is getting the quote right and getting all the product information right in order to be able to get the customer the information to renew. So we've got the product service within Work 365. What this does is it basically allows you to import the product catalog from Microsoft with all the latest changes, including pricing updates. That allows you to have everything that you want to sell correctly set up within your sales management tool, right? And then from there, you might generate a quote to send to your customers. Right now, this quote also obviously is a standard Microsoft CRM sales application capability. If you notice, I've added one product in here called the Microsoft 365 Business Basic into the quote. And because I've set up the catalog in a specific way, the system is making recommendations to me on what are the additional add-ons I could include as part of this quote, right? So it's telling me I could add, an Exchange Online threat protection plan because that wasn't there in the initial quote. So that's where the sales intelligence comes in, and the ability for you to take the product catalog and the CRM CRM quoting capabilities to build that quote out, right? From there, basically, you have the quote, you could set up a sales order and then provision that sales order right within the system using the provision order capability from Work 365. What this will do is take that sales quote from the system, once that's converted to an order, and automatically set up all the changes and provisioning directly into the system. Right, so this is basically saying this this order had one additional unit of this particular SKU and one additional unit of this particular SKU. And that's it. From there on, all the changes get provisioned and the billing continues on as it would normally. All right, so with that, what I wanted to do is, get to what is important from a renewal tracking standpoint. So, we've talked a little bit about the process, complexity, who owns it, and then finally, we always want to close on something that we can measure, right? These are, again, metrics that I've found from TSIA. This is a great organization that I follow from the standpoint of what technology services companies are doing. And these are the 8 metrics they recommend everybody track from a renewal standpoint, right? So some of these are easy, some of these are not so easy. And I guess, if we can take something away from here today would be, which ones we think we can track, and start to make an attempt at least at some of these. And these numbers here also are indicative numbers of what an average KPI should be. So it's saying, for recurring renewal metrics should be about 66% of the gross margin. About 64% of renewals should have support attached to it. Your average sales price growth should be at least 1.5%. And about 80% of the contracts typically renew. I think that's a little bit lower. It should be probably in the 90s, but that's what it is here. All right, with that, I wanted to just share with you what I think are my final conclusions on this and what I consider best practices. The idea is to basically increase the maturity and lower the complexity, right? And that happens through simplifying pricing, renewals, and payment collection. Annual payments improve cash flows, as we all know, but they create complexity. Price changes for existing customers also always create complexity. And going back into the example of CSP, what happens in the CSP program generally is Microsoft will release a new SKU and retain the existing service exactly as it is with the price that the customer has, even if it is going to be discontinued in the future. That lowers the friction. And even though you have the same service in the future, new customers buy it at the new price. Existing customers can typically keep it and retain it at the existing price that they have. You can leverage the data, as I mentioned, in the system to build your renewal queues and set up automation, notifications, and workflows around it. Use the product catalog to reflect your service offerings accurately. And this is usually where a lot of challenges come up, where, how do you have the relationships and what is the current pricing and things like that. So the product service should help with this. Of course, you want to track as many metrics as possible, not the easiest thing to do. And for some of you that are already probably doing this, this, but compensating, incentivizing sales teams, including renewal teams, is important. That brings me to my final and last slide. Thank everybody that's been on the call. I really appreciate you joining and attending the session today. If there's any questions I can answer for you, I'm happy to do that. Work 365, as I mentioned, is available in multiple countries, wherever you have Dynamics CRM. Okay, thank you, everybody. Take care, be safe, bye-bye.